essays and reviews about Elizabeth Bishop, and also a section of that book was going to be about some of her early, actually undergraduate writing, which no one had seen since she was a student at Vassar. And I had put together this collection, and I thought, who wouldn't want to see a new book about Elizabeth Bishop? And she was actually very helpful to me in the process of putting it together and telling me about things that I didn't know about. And then I sent it out, and then I got it back, and I sent it out again. The University of Cornell University Press had a series of books on contemporary poets. They had an Ashbery book, they had a James Merrill book, two of Elizabeth Bishop's biggest fans. And why wouldn't they want an Elizabeth Bishop book? But they didn't. There's a whole other story about that, which I can tell you in private, but not in public. So in the meantime, so this was like 1977, 1978, 1979, and in 1979 Elizabeth Bishop died. And that book seemed to be unpublishable. It's hard to imagine now that a book, and especially the first collection of critical essays about Elizabeth Bishop, would have a hard time getting published. But it didn't get published. 1982 rolled around, and I get a postcard in the mail, and the postcard was from Donald Hall. And Don Hall said, I am starting a new series of books on contemporary poets. And I hear you have a collection on Elizabeth Bishop, and I would like that to be the first book in this new series. And I wrote back to him saying, that's wonderful, but don't you want to read it first? And he said, no, I know it's going to be what I want. And then, fortunately, when he did get to read it, he liked it, and in fact, it was the first book in this University of Michigan Press series, and which later on had a book about Robert Bly, edited by Joyce Peseroff, and is a really was a really significant series. And it was great that he wanted a book on Elizabeth Bishop, and it was great for her, even though it was posthumous. It was certainly thrilling for me to have this volume that I had put so much work into taken by Donald Hall. Afterwards, we got to be friends, but I had never met him before. I'm not even sure how he knew my address. So it was a very good way to start a friendship, and I loved him for that, and I am forever grateful for him publishing that book. I didn't always love Don Hall's poetry, and for me, some of his early poems seemed a little academic. What I really loved were his interviews with poets in the Paris Review. And he had interviews with Robert Frost and countless other people, and they really were brilliant. I wasn't sure about the poems, and then he published a book called Kicking the Leaves, and something happened. I think either something happened to him or something happened to me, and I loved this book. I'm going to read, I think my favorite poem in Kicking the Leaves. It's the poem called Names of Horses. Names of horses. All winter, your brute shoulders strained against collars, padding and steerhide over the ash hames, to haul sledges of cordwood for drying through spring and summer, for the Glenwood stove next winter, and for the simmering range. In April, you pulled cartloads of manure to spread on the fields, dark manure of Holsteins and knobs of your own clustered with oats. All summer, you mowed the grass in meadow and hayfield, the mowing machine clacketing beside you while the sun walked high in the morning. And after noon's heat, you pulled a clawed rake through the same acres, gathering stacks, and dragged the wagon from stack to stack, and the built hayrack back uphill to the chaffee barn. 3 loads of hay a day from standing grass in the morning. Sundays, you trotted the 2 miles to church with the light load of a leather quarter-top buggy and grazed in the sound of hymns. Generation on generation, your neck rubbed the windowsill of the stall, smoothing the wood as the sea smooths glass. When you were old and lame, when your shoulders hurt bending to graze, one October, the man who fed you and kept you and harnessed you every morning led you through the corn stubble to sandy ground above Eagle Pond and dug a hole beside you where you stood shuddering in your skin and lay the shotgun's muzzle in the boneless hollow behind your ear and fired the slug into your brain and felled you into your grave and felled you into your grave, shoveling sand to cover you, setting goldenrod upright above you, whereby next summer a dent in the ground made your monument. For 150 years, in the pasture of dead horses, roots of pine trees pushed through the pale curves of your ribs. Yellow blossoms flourished above you in autumn, and in winter, frost heaved your bones in the ground. O toilers, soil makers, O Roger, Mackerel, Riley, Ned, Nellie, Chester, Lady Ghost. I think that's really a great poem, and it was something a lot more personal than his earlier poems were, I thought. One of the great things in Don Hall's life was meeting and marrying Jane Kenyon, who was also a really great poet. She was a very dear, maybe Joyce's dearest friend. And they started a magazine together called Greenhouse, which ran several years, 3 years, and publishing really interesting younger poets and friends of theirs and friends of their friends. And I got to know Jane through Joyce, and one of my most treasured friendships. So I'd like to read, this is a poem that I think isn't one of her best known poems, but it's a poem I just especially love, and maybe because it's kind of a poem for teachers and about teaching. And it's called Frost Flowers. Frost Flowers by Jane Kenyon. Sap withdraws from the upper reaches of maples. The squirrel digs deeper and deeper in the moss to bury the acorns that fall all around, distracting him. I'm out here in the dusk, tired from teaching and a little drunk, where the wild asters, last blossoms of the season, straggle uphill. Frost flowers, I've heard them called. The white ones have yellow centers at first. Later they darken to a rosy copper. They're mostly done. Then the blue ones come on. It's blue all around me now, though the color has gone with the sun. My sarcasm wounded a student today. Afterward, I heard him running down the stairs. There is no one at home but me, and I'm not at home. I'm up here on the hill, looking at the dark windows below. Let them be dark. Some large bird calls down mountain, a cry astonishingly loud, distressing. I was cruel to him. It is a bitter thing. The air is damp and cold, and by now I am a little hungry. The squirrel is high in the oak, gone to his nest. The night has silenced the last loud rupture of the calm. Don was very ill, and I think he and Jane thought, and their friends thought, that he would predecease her, but he didn't, and she died of leukemia before. Don is still alive, but she died much too early. I think this is another really great, powerful, and heartbreaking poem by Donald Hall. It's the title poem in a collection called Without. Without. We lived in a small island stone nation, without color, under gray clouds and wind, distant the unlimited ocean, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, without seagulls or palm trees, without vegetation or animal life, only barnacles and lead-colored moss that darkened when months did. Hours, days, weeks, months, weeks, days, hours. The year endured without punctuation. February without ice, winter sleet, snow melted, recovered, but nothing without thaw, although cold streams hurtled. No snowdrop or crocus, rose, no yellow, no red leaves of maple without October. No spring, no summer, no autumn, no winter, no rain, no peony, thunder, no wood thrush. The book was 1,000 pages without commas, without mice, oak leaves, windstorms, no castles, no plazas, no flags, no parrots, without Carnival or the procession of relics, intolerable without brackets or colons. Silence without color, sound without smell, without apples, without pork, to rupture, gnash, unpunctuated, without churches, uninterrupted, no aureoles, ginger noses, no opera, no, without fingers, daffodils, cheekbones. The body was a nation, a tribe, dug into stone, assaulted, white blood broken to shards. Provinces invaded, bombed, shot, shelled, artillery sniper fire, helicopter gunship, grenade burning, murder, landmine, starvation. The ceasefire lasted 48 hours, then a shell exploded in a market. Pain, vomit, neuropathy, morphine nightmare, confusion, the rack terror, the vice. Vincristine, RSC, Cytoxin, VP16, loss of memory, loss of language, losses, pneumocystis, carni pneumonia, Bactrim, foamless, unmitigated sea without sea, delirium, whip marks of petechiae, multiple blisters of herpes, zoster, and how are you doing today? I am doing. One afternoon, say, the sun came out, moss took on greenishness, leaves fell, the market opened, a loaf of bread, a sparrow, a bony dog wandered back, sniffing a laugh. It might be possible to take up a pencil, unwritten stanzas taken up and touched, beautiful, terrible sentences, unuttered. The sea, unrelenting wave, gray the sea, flotsam without islands, broken crates, block after block, the same house, the mall, no cathedral, no hobo jungle, the same women and men, they long to drink hayfields, no, without dog or semicolon or village square, without monkey or lily, without garlic. Thank you.
I first met Donald Hall when I had a fellowship at the University of Michigan, and I also met Jane. They had just gotten married. When they moved to New Hampshire, I was probably the only person Jane knew within 100 miles because she'd grown up in Ann Arbor, went to school at University of Michigan. And so our friendship developed, and we published a magazine together, Greenhouse, which was sold at the Grolier. And I also, hearing Lloyd read names of horses made me think of what Don said about that poem once. He said, all of the names of the horses there were names of his grandfather's horses except one, he said. And guess which one that was? Lady Ghost, yes. I'm going to begin with some prose by Don from Essays After 80, and I thought it would be appropriate to read some things he wrote about poetry readings, since we've had an entire day of them. When my first book came out in 1955, it was praised. I did a second book, my poems appeared in magazines, but nobody asked me to speak them out loud. I taught at the University of Michigan, which sponsored no readings. To my students, I recited great poems with gusto and growing confidence. Wyatt, Keats, Dickinson, Whitman, Yeats, Hardy, and worked on performance without knowing it. It was a shock when a lecture agent telephoned to offer a fee for reading my poems at a college. It happened again, and I flew off on days when I didn't teach. Michigan paid minimal salaries, and most teachers amplified their incomes by plodding to summer school. I stayed home and wrote, instead of employing the Socratic method in a suffocating classroom. As the phone kept ringing, I supposed that poetry readings were some sort of fad, like cramming into phone booths, for those of you who remember what a phone booth was. I would enjoy it as long as it lasted. When my generation learned to read aloud, publishing from platforms more often than in print, we heard our poems change. Sound had always been my portal to poetry, but in the beginning, sound was imagined through the eye. Gradually, the out-loud mouth juice of vowels or mouth chunk of consonants gave body to poems in performance. Dylan Thomas showed the way. Charles Olson said that form is never more than an extension of content. Really, content is only an excuse for oral sex. The most erotic poem in English is Paradise Lost. In concentrating on sound, as in anything else, there are things to beware of. Revising a poem one morning, I found myself knowing that a new phrase was a cliche or a dead metaphor, but realizing that I could intone it aloud so that it would pass. Watch out. A poem must work from the platform, but it must also work on the page. My generation started when poetry was print, before it became sound. We were lucky to practice both modes at once. I'm going to end with two poems by Jane Kenyon. The first is What Came to Me, and it was first published in an issue of Plowshares edited by Lloyd Swartz. What came to me? I took the last dusty piece of china out of the barrel. It was your gravy boat, with a hard brown drop of gravy still on the porcelain lip. I grieved for you then as I never had before. And this last poem is called Things. The hen flings a single pebble aside with her yellow reptilian foot. Never in eternity the same sound. A small stone falling on a red leaf. The juncture of twig and branch, scarred with lichen, is a gate we might enter, singing. The mouse pulls batting from 100-year-old quilt. She chewed a hole in a blue star to get it, and now she thrives. Now is her time to thrive. Things simply lasting, then failing to last. Water, a blue heron's eye, and the light passing between them. Into light, all things must fall, glad at last to have fallen. Thank you.